Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked. Here we go. Your dial is set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. Jason, thank you for engineering the broadcast. I'm Vincent Finelli. Today, hour number one, Cathy in Ohio, and she's going to share some tips about saving money, gardening tips, what to do with tomatoes, peppers, carrots, leeks, onions, etc. And the costs, and the cost of doing this, the process of planting, nurturing, etc. Hour number two, Bert Bertonis is going to be with us. I've got a question to ask him about a little bit about history. He is a history buff, and he's quite extraordinary in that realm. And we're going to be talking about radio frequency. We're going to talk about UFOs and cell phones and radio frequencies and their dangers. Cathy's with us. I don't think we're going to have time for phone calls today. Cathy, welcome.
Good morning, Vince. How are you?
I'm really, really well. Cathy, I asked Mrs. Finelli to send an email to a water filtration company. I know that you're interested in one. And I got to tell you, we cannot get a complete answer. So I'll give you some more information about that, when we get off the air. But here's the thing, class. The water filtration companies are dependent on outside the United States companies for some of their components in the final products that they sell. And they're having a great deal of difficulty getting those pieces. So let's say it takes 100 pieces to make a product, not particularly a water filtration product, but let's say a product typically takes 100 pieces to make, and you can get 90 of them. You can't sell the finished product if you only have 90% of the ingredients that it takes to make a finished product. So that's where the problem is. Cathy, what do you have on the blackboard for us today? Where do you want to start?
I was going to talk about the produce that's coming in right now and what you can do with it. Tomatoes, peppers, leeks, onions, herbs. And I also wanted to mention a few things that you can do in the fall as far as to get maybe transplant things and when to do it and how to do it and to get it ready for next year so you don't end up losing it, especially if it's obviously it has to be a perennial. And I had some other observations about shopping and what I'm finding and not finding and the prices on something. So that's kind of where I had what I had on the agenda.
Oh, that sounds great. Okay. We're all ears. Where would you like to begin on those topics?
Well, the first thing is I think everybody's getting their tomatoes in right now, and they seem to be real plentiful. So I did have some ideas on that. When you pick your tomatoes, a lot of people put them in buckets or bushels, and it's actually better if you don't do it that way. If you have a flat tray, sometimes you can find the cardboard boxes at like your grocery stores that they sell their strawberries and tomatoes and things like that in the flatter ones. They only come up about maybe 4 inches. And so you can do that. And that way you don't crush them and bruise them because they will tend to mold easier. So I just try to do 1 layer, maybe 2 if they're not real big, heavy ones. And I would say, too, go out if you can every day and check them. I had an instance where I had one huge tomato plant on one side of my barn, and I didn't get over there for a few days, and I had 30 hornworms on it, and it cleaned them off. It even ate some of the tomatoes. So I'll be lucky if I get maybe a dozen or two tomatoes off of the plant. So it was my fault. I didn't go check it regularly. So I found a few on the other ones, but that one, for some reason, they just cleaned it off. So I don't know if anybody else has had that problem this year, but.
Okay. I've got a quick comment about those boxes. It's amazing how you and your family do the same things that we and our family do. So we have those same boxes, and they're strawberry boxes, and sometimes they're used for blueberries as well. And you can get them at Sam's Club, probably at Costco. We don't have a Costco membership, but I'm sure that they do something similar. And these boxes are about 3 or 4 inches high, and they're long and wide. And we get them, and they're usually very, very clean. So they're not all beat up. They don't have, smashed food in them. So they're usually very clean, and they're delighted to get rid of them. So we have a bunch of them, and we use them here at the farm for all kinds of things. And what you're saying is when you pick your tomatoes, instead of packing them one on top of another, meaning the tomato on top of tomato, and the pressure of the weight of the tomatoes crushes the one under below, just one layer high. Well, also those boxes are great for storing on shelves. Let's say if you have a basement and you won't, it doesn't have a lot of moisture in there, you can store all kinds of things, plumbing parts, and they stack, and they have these little tabs on them, and that prevents if you stack them one on top of the next, let's say you have 4 or 5 high, you can write on the edge what's in each one of these boxes, and they won't fall over because they have these vertical tabs that prevent them from falling over. They interlock. So they're really fabulous boxes, and if you see them, I would say you ought to get them. So that's exactly what we do. So we use the boxes for all kinds of things, storing plumbing, electrical, wire, everything you can think of here at the farm. That's what we do. So I want to thank you for that. Well said, Cathy.
Yeah, Vince, I use them too. I use them for even storing like smaller things or things, food items on my metal shelves downstairs, and I do mark them. Anything that they can fit in there nicely, they're really sturdy, and I use them in the car sometime. If I'm going somewhere and I have to carry 4 or 5 dishes, they're sturdy. They're not going to bend. They're just handy to have, and so I try to pick up a couple when I go and just have them to stack. Even light bulbs.
Yep. We even store light bulbs in them. Yes, they are in the trunks of our car. They're in the station wagon. Absolutely, that's what we do. It keeps whatever's in the trunk from sliding around and getting broken or spilled. It's a great way to go, and at the cost, absolutely free. Okay, very good.
Vince, the other thing with the tomatoes is, I know I mentioned this before, but if people haven't heard me, try to use your tomatoes if you can right now. Maybe make big batches of chili or spaghetti or minestrone or goulash, and just make up some batches, and then you can freeze them. And my cherry tomatoes are just coming abundantly, and I just keep dehydrating them. I cut them in half, sprinkle them with olive oil and sea salt, and I lay them, open side up on the dehydrator trays, and I turn them on, and I have been dehydrating every other day for probably a month. So I will have sun-dried tomatoes probably well into the next year at this time. This year was a bumper crop for those for me.
Okay, can you go through that process a little slower? So you take the tomatoes, obviously you wash them, you cut them in half, and then you put them on the tray, and you just drizzle olive oil on it. You don't dip them in olive oil?
Oh, sorry, Vince. I should have been more clear. I put them in a bowl, and I drizzle the olive oil in the bowl, and I stir them, and then I sprinkle sea salt on them. Maybe, let's say if you have 3 or 4 cups, probably about 1/4 to 1/3 of a teaspoon, just for flavor. And then I let all the juice drain off. I'll drain them off or put them in a colander vent so that it's not real runny on your dehydrator. but the olive oil kind of softens them and gives them some flavor. And then I set them on the dehydrator trays. So you're going to get probably, if you have, let's say, 3 or 4 cups of the cherry tomatoes, you'll probably get about a third of a cup of, or a quarter cup of the juice from them, but you don't want to put that on your dehydrator tray. So then I put them on the dehydrator tray, and let's say if I put them on at 8 in the morning, I would check them maybe by 7 or 8 at night. They might be done, and if they're not, then I just keep monitoring every couple hours until they're done.
And what temperature do you set your dehydrator to?
I want to say for the vegetables, I want to say it's probably around 120, 125.
Okay. Very good.
And then I put them in little stacking containers. They're all uniform. I have a half pint, a pint, maybe a quarter pint. I have like all different sizes, and then I label them. I put mine in the freezer only because if you have any moisture, they can mold. Most of the time they won't, but I have had a couple where there's just maybe 1 or 2 that had some moisture in it. So I put them in the freezer and I stack. I probably have 50 to 100 of those stackable containers because they stack so nice in your freezer and you can label them and you're not wasting space then.
Okay, and let's just jump to those containers very quickly. Class, we buy the ones from Sam's Club, and I believe they're made by Rubbermaid. So these are kind of like the material that milk jugs are made out of, but much thicker. Not really, really thick. Not as good as Tupperware. They're not as good as Tupperware. They're a step down from Tupperware. But I believe they're made by Rubbermaid. And you can get about 50 of them. I'll look it up exactly during the break. But I believe you can get about 50 of them for around $20. And if you have the Plus membership at Sam's Club, you can have them shipped. We don't get anything for, there's no financial compensation for Sam's Club. And I really don't even like Sam's Club. But when they have something that is of value to us and it's a win for us, then I will shop at Sam's Club. So you might want to get these. And we probably have 4 boxes of 50 of them. And you can put them in the freezer. So it's great for if you have spaghetti sauce, if you have whatever it is you're going to put in the freezer. They stack up and they are the right size. So we use them all the time, every day. And I think it's a great way to go. And if you don't drop them when they're cold, they'll last a long time. But if you drop them, they're going to crack. So be careful with them. And you can literally put spaghetti sauce in them, with meat, without meat, any way you want to do it. And it really works well. The other thing we do, is we use freezer bags. And sometimes we will put cool spaghetti sauce in a freezer bag if we ran out of these, Rubbermaid containers. And we'll store them with the Ziploc up and don't overfill them. And they work fine as well. But I prefer the Rubbermaid containers. Cathy, your comments?
Yeah, Vince, I do too. I don't think mine are Rubbermaid. I do have some of those. Mine are with the canning supplies that I have. I have both. I've just accumulated them over the years, but I put applesauce and I even put like flour in them in the freezer, some of the wheat flours, and then I just label them. And the other thing is I put a heavy mat, like one of them rubber mats that you stand on. I put that at the bottom of my freezer because I have dropped them and cracked them. And this way, if it hits the rubber mat, I don't break them. Okay,
I just found it. Sam's Club, bestseller, Rubbermaid 50-piece, easy find lids, food storage set, $19.98 for 50 pieces. We'll be right back. Class, very quickly, so I looked up, I went to samsclub.com, and it's the Rubbermaid 50-piece, easy find lids, food storage set. That's what it's called. Rubbermaid 50-piece, easy find lids, food storage set, $19.98. Now, they also have different arrangements or different combinations. There's a 64-piece set, a 100-piece set. They're not the same. It's not the same set with a different number of items in the box. They are different quality. The 64-piece is thin and flimsy. It will not last as long as the 50-piece set. So just wanted to let you know, be careful, look at the pictures, look at the thickness, and the ones that we think are pretty good, they're not as good as the Tupperware. They are not. But they are probably the best you can get in today's world. So I just wanted to share that. That's a great starting point for us, Cathy. Right after the broadcast, we're going to be doing some hay, but I'm going to see if we can get the family to pick the rest of our tomatoes and cut them, wash them, cut them in half, and drain them and put them in the dehydrator for the rest of what we have. Please continue.
Vince, you can, if you're picking and you don't really have enough to do a batch, you can pick them and put them in the freezer of like regular tomatoes if you're going to can them later. And then some of the people take, and when you thaw them, I thaw them in like a big Rubbermaid bowl or Tupperware bowl, but you'll have a watery portion, and then the skin should come right off when you thaw them. So let's say you only pick and you only have enough for 2 or 3 pints. You can freeze them, and then when you're ready to can, you can do them all at one time. So that way you're not wasting tomatoes, because it's really not worth it to do 2 or 3 pints.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you use the dried tomatoes, Cathy, how do you use them?
Vince, when I do mine and I dehydrate them, if you are making like a stir fry or you're making a pasta, and let's say you got pesto, or even in your regular spaghetti sauce, you can throw a handful or 2 in. I eat them in the winter. I put them on my salad, or you could put them like on a bruschetta or something like that. But I'll use them and just like do pasta and throw a few sun-dried tomatoes. You can put them in a pasta salad, and the flavor is a lot more intense. If you bite into a dehydrated cherry tomato, it's a lot more intense than just eating a cherry tomato. It's just somehow it concentrates the flavor. So it really brings your dishes alive and has a lot more taste.
Outstanding. So, class, what you're hearing is a couple things. One is in the winter when tomatoes are not available, fresh in most locations, locally, you'll have some tomatoes. And the other thing is you can use them to extend. So if you're making your spaghetti sauce, you can put some of these in and extend what you have. And that's where we're headed. We're headed toward extending what we have, because I can see it getting worse. Cathy, please continue.
Oh, but one last thing on the tomatoes, and then I'll move on. But if you want to cook down tomatoes and you need the room, or you want to just let them cook all day, you can use a great big, like a Nesco makes a roasting pan. So you can just skin them and put them in there and let them cook all day. And that way that frees up your stove for the canning process. So I haven't done that as often as I should, but it's a good idea. It just saves room on your stove and on your counter. You can move that roaster somewhere where you're not working all day.
Cathy, I don't think you know this, but I wanted to share this with you. Nesco likes USA Prepares so much, and we're talking Nesco, Nesco. They sent their top sales team from corporate headquarters to our expo to teach us about food dehydration. And I asked them to bring a lot of inventory with them, and they sold out. Everything they had, they sold out at our expo. So I really like Nesco, a fine company.
Yeah, I do too, Vince. I have several of their products. I like them.
Okay.
Okay, Vince.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. A couple of things I wanted to mention. If you want to store some of your vegetables, I know, like with beets, don't wash off the dirt. Just brush it off and like put them in a green bag or a storage bag. They'll last a lot longer. And you cut the tops off and save the beet greens for later.
Very good. Very good. And those plastic bags that you used to be able to get off the roll at the fresh produce area, you can buy those bags in a roll on the internet. We'll be right back. Cathy's with us. She's USA Prepares domestic engineering instructor, and she's teaching us how to save money. And boy, time's going very quickly. Cathy, please continue.
Vince, on the beets, a couple quick things. The beet greens are awesome as far as nutrition. They're probably one of the highest ratings of nutrition in them. I use them and I make a green smoothie every day, but I can't use all the greens. So I'm going to just take and freeze them in small bags and then pull them out when I want to make them through the winter. Or you can saute them. You can put them in dishes and things if you want. But beet greens are wonderful. But if you harvest your beet, from what I'm reading, a lot of the places say don't rinse everything off right away. Just brush it off. They'll last longer. There's something in the soil that keeps them fresher. So I just kind of take a little soft scrub brush, and when I harvest them, I try not to let them go any bigger than like maybe a tennis ball. The taste is a little sweeter. If they get bigger, they're a little bit more bland, I guess. So that's a couple tips on the beets, and those would last in the ground quite a long time because it's a root vegetable. So if you can let them go for a while to get bigger, then you'd have them a little longer. My celery is doing wonderful. So that's another one that can stand cold. Now, last year I took a bunch of chopped up leaves and I put them all around the celery, and I had celery probably till early December, and I'm in Ohio. So, and you can use like the leaves of it too. The leaves have a lot of flavor. So I will take the leaves when I cut up my celery, and I'll dehydrate them, or I'll put them in little Ziploc bags in the freezer, and I use them when I make stock, chicken soup or vegetable soup or anything I need the celery taste for. So those are tips that you can use to extend your vegetables at like a little bit colder weather. When I harvest my leeks, one of the series books that I have is called The Self-Sufficient Gardener, and he says to leave the leeks in the ground as long as possible. And there again, I leave them until early December, and I bring them in. I have little 5-gallon buckets, and I dig out and I leave a little bit of dirt on them, like just enough at the roots so the roots aren't bare. And I put them in the 5-gallon bucket and put them in the garage, and I'll have leeks till February. They really last a long time. I'll put a tiny bit of water in them every now and then, not a lot. I don't want them to get moldy, but maybe just drizzle a little water maybe after a few weeks. But the leeks are wonderful, and they last a long time. But if the trick is to harvest them late and leave some dirt around the root.
Cathy, The Self-Sufficient Gardener, was that written by John Seymour?
Yes, sir. Yep.
I got to tell you, that book, do you know how much that book is on eBay right now?
No.
$75.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
It's a real nice book.
Absolutely.
It goes through like every vegetable, how to plant it, how to harvest it, how to store it, and it's short and concise. Each vegetable is maybe like a page, and how deep and how to sow the seeds. When I took my Master Gardener class, that was one of the books they recommended, and so I got it. And so, yeah, it's a great book. And then the other thing I just did recently, Vince, was I got online and I ordered another pruner. It's a Felco pruner, and I think I told you before, I bought one at $25, and they're up to $55 now, but I use my pruner so much that I thought if it breaks or I lose it, I got to have another one. So I ordered another one.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's what we're doing, and we're making sure that we have spares of the things that are absolutely mission critical. Absolutely mission critical. So, class, consider this great advice that Cathy is providing.
And the name of the pruner, I'll spell it. It's F as in Fred, ELCO. And it's a high grade pruner, and it'll last you probably your whole life. And you can buy replacement blades for those too. One of the things, Vince, that you can do now, I know corn is going to be around a little bit longer, but not too much. You can take the corn, and I don't do anything to it. I just take the corn, shuck it, and I'll cut it off. I just stand it up and I cut it off. Some people have that little corn tool that it goes around. It's like, looks like a circle. But I just take a sharp knife and I cut it off on a cutting board, and I'll put it in a little freezer container, and I put a little bit of milk in there. The milk keeps it from drying out, and it keeps it sweet. And you don't have to save the milk. You can drain it when you want to use it, but you can freeze it. So I think I'm going to do a dozen or 2 ears of corn just to have that good flavor later on in the winter when we can't get the fresh corn.
Great suggestion. What about peppers?
Oh, I love peppers. I am getting them. I haven't gotten as many as normal this year. But I take my Cuisinart food processor and I'll core them, and I just chop them in big chunks, maybe like 2-inch chunks. I put them in there and I dice them up real quick. I'll do at least a peck or two. And I'm going to go to the farmer's market on Monday because they sell them. They're $5 for a peck. And there's probably at least 20 peppers in there, probably more than that. And I just lay them in Ziploc bags and lay them flat. And then I stack them. And then I put them in like a big freezer bag. I kind of double bag them so that I have protection. But that way I'm not buying $1.25 or $1.50 a pepper in the wintertime when I need one. So I'll just get 1 or 2 pecks. I'm getting some in my garden, but I don't think I'll get enough to last me through the winter.
Cathy, when you wash your, let's say, tomatoes or peppers, some people have asked me this question. I'd love to hear your response. Should I use like dishwashing detergent when I wash tomatoes? I've always said absolutely, positively not, right?
No, I don't.
That's what I've said. Absolutely not.
Well, I feel like if they're from your own garden, I don't use any insecticides or pesticides in my garden. So, or herbicides. And so I just rinse them off with cold water and, maybe take like a little toothbrush or a little soft vegetable brush and just brush them off, and dry them. But yeah, to me, that if you can look at what you need through the winter, even celery or onions. I mean, my onions did wonderful this year, so I'll be drying them also. There was something I saw online, and I didn't have a chance to do a lot of research, but it was called a drying rack. And it's got about 8 to 10 shelves, and it's wooden. And the shelves, I don't know that they come out. I think they just stack, but it's for storing root vegetables and onions and anything that stores a long time, like your squash, beets. Well, yeah, you could probably store some beets, but onions and garlic, those types of things. So it was really a neat thing. The lady had it down in her cellar, and I don't know how expensive it was. I just saw it yesterday, and I hadn't had a chance to get online. But if somebody needed to store, because it had like open slats so that the air can circulate. But she had a big garden, so she could store all of her produce. Have you ever heard of anything like that, then?
No, but, well, have I used anything? No, but I believe my grandparents did. I believe those were the kinds of things that were done back in the 1920s. I believe that was the case, during the first Great Depression, when people in the city well, my grandfather hand dug his own basement. He had a house with my grandmother, and in order to survive, he literally got a wheelbarrow, a shovel, and a bucket, and he dug a hole under the house, and then he reinforced the sides and made walls and made a root cellar. That's what he did. So, yeah, they had those kinds of things, the mason jars, the canning equipment, and I have it. I have it all here. So I believe that's how they did it. But I believe they used to use tomato crates and vegetable crates that vegetables were shipped in back then. They're made out of wood with slats, and I think that's how they did it. So that's a little foggy in my memory, but I believe the answer is yes, my family has done that.
That's incredible that he dug his own root cellar.
It was in World War I, and he volunteered, and literally he dug by hand a basement. Started digging and put in one of those Bilko style doors, but he made it out of wood, made the steps out of concrete, and he entered the basement from outside or right where the area was to wash the produce from the garden. So he made an assembly line. So they had an outside sink, and it was plumbed in so they could wash the grapes. They had grape arbor for a cool area to sit in the shade, so they could sit under the grape arbors. I mean, a lot of grapes. It made wine, and the rest of the backyard was a garden. And there was a little walkway to get out the back door and get into the driveway. But I would say almost all the area of the backyard was for processing of food, literally. And that's what people did back then. They worked really hard, and they survived. And maybe some of that genetics has been passed on to me. And maybe that's why we do this broadcast. And maybe same thing happened in your family, Cathy. I'll bet you it did.
Yeah, it did. It did. My family grew up in the Depression. Yep. Well, so, one of the stories...
Yeah, but please continue.
One of the stories my aunt told me was that back in the Depression, she said when people had items, they shared. One lady had an apple tree, so all the neighbors got apples. And then another person had a peach tree, and she said that was just how it was in the neighborhood. They didn't have big yards where they were. They were little yards, but they did try to have gardens and some fruit trees. But she said if anybody came in any extra, they would try to share with the neighbors that shared with them. And she said that kind of helped them survive.
That's exactly what happened with my grandparents. I mean, they had red and black, they had black and green grapes, and they were superb. And they shared the grapes, and they shared the wine. And it was neighbor helping neighbor. That's exactly what it was. But, they weren't distracted by cell phones, and they weren't distracted by watching TV and going to the movies. It was all work just to survive. We'll be right back with Cathy. Cathy's with us. Cathy in Ohio. Cathy, you mentioned celery, and I just want to share with the class very quickly. I had 2 bunches of celery, and I washed it, cut off the leaves, chopped it up, put it in a dehydrator, the Nesco dehydrator, dehydrated it, and the result that I had was about a cup of dehydrated celery. So, class, when you evaporate the moisture and you leave just the vegetable without the moisture, you're going to have a much smaller amount than you probably think you're going to have. So you look at 2 bunches of celery and you go, that's a lot of celery, but it'll fit in a cup when you're done. And then, so I just wanted to share that. Cathy, any comments?
Yeah, that's true, Vincent. They do shrink up quite a bit.
But it sure is nice because that was probably 8 months ago that I did it, and we still have celery. Now, we keep it in the refrigerator, and if I make soup or something like that, I shake out the celery from this. I put it in a jar with one of those, kind of like I guess maybe if it were a spaghetti sauce, it'd be a small spaghetti sauce jar, that kind of a jar. Maybe olives came in it or something like that. But that's the size, a small jar from two bunches of celery. And it really is nice to have that. And yes, you can do it, class. So all you have to do is just say, I'm going to do it. Because before I dehydrated celery, I never did that before. Now it's no big deal. And it's the same for everybody else. Okay. Carrots, we can tell us about carrots?
Yeah, Vince, carrots are the same way. You can just gently brush off the dirt a little bit and store them. They store well in the crisper drawer. I don't normally have enough left. I don't know if you do. Mine normally go pretty quick, so it's not like I store them long term. But they do last quite a long time in the ground, and you know, as long as you don't store them where they're wet, they'll last quite a bit. Quite a bit. So. How
about dehydration in carrots? Have you done that?
No, I haven't, Vince, because one of those things where, honestly, if my crop has gone pretty quick, I give them to the neighbors and my kids, and if I need them, I can get a 10-pound bag at Sam's or Costco, and it's pretty reasonable. So I haven't done that.
Okay, how about onions? What do you do with onions?
Well, I have dehydrated onions. I have a box. I keep them in it's like a flat cardboard box, kind of the same size as we were talking about, but it's narrower, and I keep them dry. And I do have quite a bit, and sometimes I'll braid the top. I wait until the tops bend over before I pull them. That to me is a sign that the onion is ready to be picked. If not, if I have to harvest them, I just lay them and I let them dry for a few days, sometimes on the patio table, and then I'll braid them and put them on like an onion sack and just hang them. But, normally I can keep them, if I let them dry and I keep them on a flat layer in that box, I pretty much can keep them till I use them. So,
all right.
I use them so much, and I donate them too. So,
when you store onions, you store them flat. You just don't leave. If you bought them at the store, if you were to buy them at the store, and I'm thinking our class may be in that position now where they buy them. How would you store them? What would you do if you had a 5-pound bag of onions from the store?
Well, it's just I kind of do the same thing, Vince, but I keep an eye on them a lot quicker because they're not as fresh. And I always feel them. If they're really hard, then I'm happy, and I make sure there's no like dents in them. And that's the other thing I did want to mention, Vince, was when you bring home anything out of a bag, whether it's apples, potatoes, take everything out of the bag and look at it, because if you have one that's bad or one carrot that's bad in that plastic bag or potato, it'll start spreading into all your other produce. So I like the cardboard boxes or the wooden, like you were talking about, the wooden boxes, and I just put one of them little, it's like a drawer. You put it in your vegetable drawer. It's got like little tiny feet on the bottom, and it's got holes so that the air can get underneath them. I put that in the bottom of them. I just watch them. I don't refrigerate them. I don't know if that's right or not. I've heard that the taste isn't the same. I just let them dry, but I do keep an eye on them that way.
Cathy, I want to share something very quick with you in the class. We have 2 crock pots. One, and they're made by Rival, around the same vintage, probably from the 70s or the 80s. One of them has a removable crock. The other has a crock that is not removable. They are the same capacity, 3.5 quarts. And I measured the electricity consumption. It uses 40% more with the removable crock because it's nowhere near as efficient as it is with the non-removable crock. So I just wanted to share that with the class. So if you are using a crock pot and energy is important to you, let's say you're off grid, you're going to want the one that is a non-removable crock pot, non-removable crock from a crock pot if you get the Rival. Have you noticed that as well, Cathy? That the heat, you waste a lot of heat. Yep. So there you go. Wow, Cathy, that hour went so fast. I'm looking forward to our next broadcast. Cathy in Ohio, thank you. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Bert Bertonis is with us. He's a radio frequency engineer, patent holder, and he designs some systems for some of the biggest of the big, literally, no exaggeration, in Silicon Valley, sometimes mispronounced as Silicon Valley, but it's Silicon Valley, California, the epicenter of technology for the planet. Welcome, Bert.
Good morning, Ben.
Hey, I was thinking, without getting into the specifics, of the university or the fraternity. But you did attend a university, a very large one, well known, and you're a member of a fraternity. Is that right?
Sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. And so you're also a student of history, and you really like learning about historical things. And as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, weren't you involved in the historical record keeping for a fraternity, a very large fraternity?
No, I think that was a different frater.
Oh, a different frater. Okay. I thought it might have been you. But anyway, the reason I ask is there's a story about this fraternity and their associated sorority. So what happens with fraternities at the university level, they typically have an affiliation with a sorority. So if there's a social event, the fraternity and the sorority may do something, as a joint venture. So a bunch of girls and a bunch of guys, and they do things and so forth. And one day, I was approached by a whole vehicle full of young ladies. Just me, and this whole group of young ladies. And they came up to me and they said, "Hey, we have a surprise for you, and we don't want the other brothers in the fraternity to know about it just yet. We just want you to know about it. So would you come with us?" So I got in their vehicle, and I thought they were going to take me to the sorority house.
Was that when you got kidnapped?
Well, yeah, and the question is what they yeah. So what what happened was they got me in their car and they said, this is a surprise, and just you're going to know about it, and for now, and later the rest of the fraternity will learn about it. And I thought they were going to take me to the sorority house, and they went out of town. They took me about 20 miles out of town and left me. And on the way, they finally told me what it was. And they said it was in retaliation. This was their retaliation for something that happened at the sorority house. And they explained it to me this way. They said, a bunch of you guys broke into our sorority house and stole our underwear. You know anything about that?
No.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I can understand why you don't want to answer that. Okay. So what do you have for us today?
Well, you had a couple of things up on the docket, and I thought we'd talk about 5G and electromagnetic radiation first, because I think talking about that, I can provide a lot of answers. The other topic you suggested, we can cover that if time permits, but I think there we have questions and answers.
Okay. Well, why don't you begin?
Sure. Well, you had mentioned, in fact, you had told me a story about a neighbor who was concerned about his radiation at his house and his electronic meter, and how he could shield it. And so I tried to explain that radio waves, in terms of their power level, is logarithmic. And so I think this is important for everyone to understand, is that the way nature in the universe created electromagnetic energy, the amplitude, the strength, it's not linear. It's logarithmic. In other words, it can vary by enormous orders of magnitude. Linear might be, you look at something and you go, oh, it's, twice as long as it is wide. Or, this potato weighs twice as much as this small one here. And, that's more or less linear comparison. In logarithmic, the best example I can give you is the Richter scale on earthquakes. An earthquake of 6 compared to an earthquake of 7 is 10 times. And 10 times the movement of the Earth. And that's how electromagnetic energy, in terms of its level, how it operates, how it exists. So, look, and I'm giving you this just kind of to set the backdrop of what we need to be concerned about for sure, what we maybe should be concerned about, and what is almost certainly probably safe, or at least at a level below other things that have been there, our whole lives. So, when they first started working with electricity, and actually this goes back to audio, believe it or not, Alexander Graham Bell, he realized he had to come up with a way to measure relative strength of signals. So he came up with something, and it basically said every time the signal goes up by 10 times, I'll call it a bell after himself. And that kind of took off. Everyone said, okay, this unit's a bell stronger than this other unit. And I don't really know that he named it on day one. I think it was named after him. But in any case, people started using it, and they realized, well, this is pretty big. How about if we cut it down by 1/10? And they said, okay, let's try decibel, little d, big B. And that worked out really well. In fact, it turns out that if you're listening to a tone, 1 decibel is exactly the difference in strength that your ear can detect. And they go, wow, this decibel is great. And that's how we came about using it about, 100 years ago or so. So now I mention this because let's go back to where you told me this person in his house was concerned about the radio waves coming from his smart meter. So it turns out that the radio waves we're exposed to just by being on this planet, in this country, in this day and age, with all the radio signals going by, believe it or not, the level of signals that we're exposed to, if we could take an antenna and tie it into our heads and, create a human spectrum analyzer, the levels we would be receiving, and see if you can put your head around this, probably wrong choice of words, but it varies by 100 dB. In other words, from the strongest signal, which would be, probably your cell phone in your hand, or, walking right up to your wireless router, or, let's say, probably not a good idea, but you live across the street from a TV or radio transmitter or a cell tower, which is more prevalent, that being the strongest, all the way to the weakest, being out in Yosemite Park in the middle of nowhere and just picking up the background radiation or a few distant TV radio stations. That difference in amplitude is over 100 dB. In other words, that's not a difference of 10 times or 100 times or 1,000 times. It's I don't even know what 110 dB would be, some quadrillion to 1. So now, back to your friend in the house. How strong was that signal coming out of his smart meter? I suspect, even though he thinks putting steel wool around it got rid of his headache, I suspect, that was just him thinking he lowered the signal, because the smart meter is going to radiate, just feeling a little seam. It's on what we call a closed loop. And even if he did put it over the antenna, it's just going to force it to want to transmit more power to get to whatever device, and typically it's your neighbor's meter. Believe it or not, they talk from house to house. It's just going to force it to use even more power. So, giving you a long answer, Vince, but I don't think your neighbor friend did anything to improve his situation in the physical sense.
Okay, and back to the decibel scale. So my understanding, Bert, is that a very faint sound, very faint, would be about 20 decibels. You're just barely able to hear the sound. And a very loud, painful sound is 120 decibels. So the difference between just being able to hear it.
Yeah, you're confusing.
Well, I'm just trying to give us.
No, but you're confusing two things. The decibel itself is just a relative measurement. There's no absolute level. Now, if you talk in terms of if you add another letter like dBm we use in radio electronics, a dBm or dBW. dBW means 1 watt. dBm 1 milliwatt. So in terms of audio, and I'd have to go get my audio chart to see what it is. You're not referring to a dB. You're referring to a dB plus something else that sets an absolute level.
What I'm referring to is the delta. What I'm trying to share with our class is this on a sound type audio scale that 20 dB is barely audible and 120 dB is painfully it inflicts so much pain. It's like just at the level of a loud rock band, close up. That's the delta. I'm just trying to share.
Okay. I can grab my.
We have a 2-second delay, Bert. I'm looking at it right now. I'm not sure why we have it, but it's a really long delay. At the end of this segment, I'm going to reconnect and see if I can shorten this delay because we're accidentally stepping on each other. But I'll be quiet. Please continue.
Yeah, I guess we probably have a little too much string on the soup cans. Can you pull your cord on your can in a little?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do during the break. That's exactly what I'm going to do.
Okay. And after the break, I will get out we do have here in the lab a decibel sound meter, and I'll get it out and read off some of the chart and the statistics. So, but yes, the whole point is we're talking about a logarithmic scale. So the Bluetooth earpiece you put in your head, actually, in your ear, is actually only about, a couple of milliwatts. Very low. We're talking, maybe 600 times lower than what your cell phone puts out that you hold up to your head. So, big difference.
Bert Bertonis is with us. He's in Silicon Valley, California. And, Bert, I believe you mentioned that cell phone signal strength is about 600x what the signal strength of a Bluetooth earpiece might be, both of which many people put right next to their heads. Please continue.
Yeah, so that's one example. And, since we're talking about cell phone, let me also say that, the iPhone was designed, and all phones really, to radiate most of the energy out of the side, not facing your head. So here's the funny thing. You've probably seen some people advertising these shields that you can put over a cell phone and, to reduce supposedly the amount of RF energy going into your head. Well, so they cover the outside of the phone in this, and what does that do? Well, because it's a closed loop, the cell phone tower says, hey, I'm getting a weak signal, please boost your power. So it forces the cell phone to boost the power to its max, which is 600 milliwatts, and since you've now shielded going away from your head, all of that energy now is going to go right into your brain. So, perversely, buying these devices can actually make it worse in terms of what you're actually absorbing in RF energy.
Okay, so what's the quick takeaway? So if you're going to use a cell phone, use a speakerphone and keep it at a distance, right?
Yeah, don't hold it up to your head. Just use Bluetooth, use whatever hands-free option you have. If you're in your car, put it over on an empty seat and just use your car Bluetooth. That's very safe.
Okay, and let's just extrapolate this. So let's say you have in the good old days, and you had a child who was on a school bus, and just to keep them all safe, you make sure your child has a cell phone. So there's 45 children on the bus, and it's all metal, top, bottom, left, right, except for the windows. And many of the children are looking at their cell phones and communicating on their cell phones. What does that do, being in that metal box with 45 cell phones?
Well, the metal box probably in itself doesn't make a difference in turn. It's not like the metal box is trapping you, so there's more RF. It doesn't work that way. But what the metal box does do is cause most of, if not all of those cell phones to have trouble reaching the tower. So I would guess that almost all of those cell phones are now broadcasting at maximum power because they're inside that metal box. So probably not good, but not maybe for the reason you first think.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, please continue.
Yeah, so in terms of what you need to worry about, you have to really look at, what are the sources that are dangerous and what are innocuous. So being near a cell phone tower, obviously, that would be one that we could classify as more dangerous. And everyone talks about 5G and the new frequencies that are going to be used. And I know, Vince, we've covered that topic on previous shows. But let me just say that, in my view, from having worked with all these frequencies, it's not so much that the higher frequencies are any more dangerous. In fact, some people say the most dangerous frequencies for the human body are around 100 megahertz because that's where our natural resonance of our body is. But the problem with 5G is that there's going to be more prolific cell phone head ends and base stations. We call them micro base stations. So instead of having a cell phone tower, every quarter mile or, depending on how dense your city or environment is, instead they're going to be at every building, everywhere you walk, not just one in a shopping center, but maybe 100 in a shopping center, one in every office, probably more than one in every office. So in terms of the aggregate power, the total amount of power, that's what's potentially more dangerous, not the any one unit per se, just the fact that we're going to have so many more of them.
I remember you telling me a story about how you were called in as a consultant. There was an installation at a campus, and where students lived, and they put in some Wi-Fi equipment so that students could have in their rooms all the amenities of ubiquitous Wi-Fi. It didn't work very well, and it was a multi-story building. And you found out that the installer set all of the Wi-Fi routers to maximum power, and they were overpowering each other. Bert Bertonis is with us, and Bert, the story I was relating to was when you were consulting about a whole bunch of access points, wireless routers set to maximum power, and they were jamming each other, and they weren't working very well. And so what typically happens is, I guess, the professionals who install these really don't know all the answers, and they just turn them up to maximum power, and they fight with each other. Isn't that what you were telling us?
Yeah, they were putting in repeaters, and the whole dorm was basically just clogged with so much RF energy. At first, you put in a repeater, and you get a little stronger energy, and it sounds good, but you're really making your neighbor have more interference, so then your neighbor puts one in, and then that keeps continuing to where everybody puts them in, but nobody's working because the interference just gets unbelievable. And the other issue is that these are all working asynchronously. In other words, they're not coordinated. So, Wi-Fi, believe it or not, has a very primitive protocol, and it basically, just listens, sees if it thinks it's okay, and starts transmitting without any knowledge of what's happening at the other side. So, without any type of link coordination, system coordination, it just ran havoc, and the net result was nobody really was able to get their Wi-Fi to connect.
And just as a rough approximation, do you have any idea about how much this system cost to be installed? The overall cost of the system that didn't work very well?
Yeah, probably. I don't recall the exact numbers, but you know how these things usually work. The equipment maybe cost $1,000 in total. I mean, the Wi-Fi has gotten very inexpensive, but the consultants probably charged $50,000. So, and, so you can go with that.
Mm-hmm.
But by the way, how is our connection here? I didn't do anything at my end.
I fixed it. I fixed it from my end. We're down to 1/10 of a second, from 2 seconds down to 1/10 of a second. I'm
curious, what do you think the issue was?
I don't know, but what I did was I reconnected. I disconnected. I have, I can point with the mouse, and I have lots of buttons here on the screen. And what I can do is I can disconnect my connection to GCN, and that's what I did. I disconnected, waited a couple seconds, and reconnected. And I did that a bunch of times, and finally I got it, where I got a good connection. And what the class didn't know, and what you didn't know, Bert, was I even disconnected while you were talking. So, I figured I had about 10 seconds before you took a breath, and I disconnected and reconnected a bunch of times like that, and finally we got it. So that's where we are.
Yes, I did notice that after I finished talking and took a breath, we were in the middle of a commercial.
Yeah. Okay, please continue with this fascinating discussion about radio frequencies. And what you're sharing, I don't think the class was totally aware of, and now they have a greater appreciation for the sophistication and the lack of sophistication of these radio frequencies that are all around us. And one other thing, Bert, so if a person lives in an apartment building, what's the likelihood of having a greater amount of radio frequencies, Wi-Fi, et cetera, cell phone frequencies, microwaves, than if they just live in a single-family house in the suburbs?
Greater. I guess, let's say 10 dB greater.
Mm-hmm. And what would that be as a factor of X? How many X greater would that be?
So remember, a bell was 10 times, so a decibel is 1/10, and then 10 dB, you're back to a bell, so 10 times greater.
Mm-hmm. And let's do it this way. A rural farm, kind of, imagine our farm versus, typical farm versus a single family house in a neighborhood, versus an apartment building.
I'd say, this is good. We got the dBs down here. I'd say 10 dB from you to the suburban house, and 10 dB from the suburban house to the apartment building. And if that apartment building is near the World Trade Center transmitter or some other major cell phone or radio or TV transmitter, you can add another 10 or 20 dB to that.
Okay, so from low to high, the farm in the middle of nowhere versus the apartment building near the World Trade Center, or in somewhere in New York City, Trump Tower maybe. What X would we be talking about from low to high?
Well, I'd say just in terms of the aggregate power, maybe 50 dB. But in terms of individual signals, go back to the beginning of our discussion here today, could be as much as 100 dB. Because if you actually, try to just, go to your farm, take some measurements on a spectrum analyzer, go to Trump Tower, take some measurements, you would actually find, and you don't even need to go to Trump Tower, you could just go to your local cell phone tower. You would find, as you measured these signal levels, at least 100 dB of difference between the ambient noise on your farm and across the street from the cell phone tower.
So what is the takeaway for our class, Bert? Most people have cell phones. Most people have Wi-Fi. Most people live in either a neighborhood or an apartment building. There are few of us who live in the middle of nowhere for a lot of reasons. So what is the takeaway for someone who lives somewhere in the middle, like in a home in a suburb? What can they do?
Well, minimize using your cell phone up to your head. So use Bluetooth, use hands-free. If possible, don't locate your house across the street from a cell phone tower. Remember, they're locating a lot of these now on power line, high voltage distribution towers. If you notice, a lot of those towers now have cell phone equipment embedded into them. So avoid that. Obviously, don't live across the street from your radio transmitter for your AM radio station. But all that said, one of the reasons that, we don't have a lot of data yet is that it doesn't mean for sure you're going to get cancer or you're going to get sick. Well, the best we can say now is your chances of getting cancer or getting sick have increased. But it doesn't mean, you might be destined to get cancer no matter what because of your DNA or just, things you ate. I guess you talk about that a lot with your doctors, Norm Shealy and other doctors you've had on. So, but the whole point is your chances, your odds of getting it go up. And just like how you eat in your diet, the same thing's true about where you are in the environment in terms of electromagnetic energy exposure.
Okay, how about this? There's some concern about window screens. Back in the 1950s, 1960s, well, back in the 1940s, window screens were made out of brass wire in a woven kind of a mesh. That was superseded by aluminum window screens because aluminum was much, much less expensive. And then that was superseded or replaced by fiberglass window screens. Now, some people believe that electromagnetic rays, wavelengths, radio frequencies are coming through their windows because it's easier to get through glass than it is, in many cases, than it is to get through a stone or a wood-framed, wood-sided house or aluminum-sided house. So, Bert, is there any advantage for going backwards in technology, replacing fiberglass screens with aluminum screens or brass screens to keep some of that electromagnetic radiation out? Is there any reason to do that or not?
Not really. I can't see why. And again, you're thinking in terms of visual, what you see with the eyes. Radio waves don't care about, the obstructions for radio waves are much different than what you see with your eyes. So you're talking about the windows, but what about the other 90% of the house that doesn't have windows? It may or may not be shielded for RF, and if it is, it might be just certain frequencies that it's shielding against. In other words, do you have fiberglass installation with metal back, or most likely not? So do you have stucco, which my home does, which is a metal screen embedded in there? Well, that'll filter out, or filters may be the wrong word, but shield out some frequencies, but not others. So the window's really just a small part of that. And also your roof, obviously, signals can come through. I have a tile roof, and, radio waves can penetrate it fairly easily. In fact, I put we talked once about FM radio stations. I have an FM radio antenna in my crawl space of my roof, pointed out through the roof, and it works fine because there's really, except for a few nails, there's no metal in my roof.
Mm-hmm. If you were building a home today and you wanted to protect yourself from electromagnetic radiation, do you have any suggestions, or is it impossible?
You don't need to really use Wi-Fi everywhere if your house has been wired for Ethernet. So, interestingly enough, there still is a little bit of radiation off of the Cat5 cables from high-speed internet, but it's very low. And so, to the extent you can, use a wired connection. So that's the first advice I would give.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we did here at the farmhouse. We've got thousands, maybe just under 10,000 feet of wire in our farmhouse. We have coaxial cable for television, which we've never used. It's there. So we have, and we've done it in a star configuration, which means that all the wires go back to one point. So we have in every room of the house, there's wire for telephone. I'm talking about plain old telephone service. Then we have two Cat5e cables for networking, and then we have one or two television coaxial cables. This is in every room. So it's all wired back to, we'll call it a wiring closet, which has network switches and patch panels and things like that. So that's what we did, and it works absolutely fine. And so I'm in 100% agreement with what you suggested. Okay, what else do you have for us in class today?
So again, if you have a choice of using your cell phone or using a cordless phone, if you have, not everyone has landlines anymore. I still have one. It's connected to a cordless phone system. Cordless phone is a little more powerful than Bluetooth, but much, much lower power than a cell phone. So if you are concerned about the high power levels, then avoid using your cell phone and go back to a 2.4 or 5.8 gigahertz DECT or other wireless standard cordless phone in your house, and that will have a lower power electromagnetic energy power density.
Is there one frequency that you would recommend if someone wants to buy a digital walk around the house type of a phone that is cordless and has a reach of, let's say, 100 to 150 feet? Can you tell us that when we come back? Bert Bertonis is with us. Do you have a frequency that you would recommend since there are different frequencies available of those type phones?
Yeah, sure. So, just recapping it, you asked an interesting question. The earliest cordless phones, believe it or not, some of them used 1.7 megahertz, which was just above the AM broadcast band, and they used AM modulation. So you could actually listen to the cordless phones if your regular radio tuned up just slightly above the end of the AM broadcast spectrum. But, getting to your question, there are a number of choices in the frequencies, and all but one of them overlap with Wi-Fi and other wireless devices. The one that doesn't is DECT, which is a European standard. The DECT 6.0 standard cordless phone uses 1.9 gigahertz, and there are a few cell phone systems there, but it's not going to cause the interference in your home that, say, a 2.4 or 5.8 would in conflicting with your Wi-Fi system. There's very good security on the DECT system, so if you were out shopping for a new home cordless phone system, that would be my recommendation, a 1.9 gigahertz DECT. The new standard is 6.0.
Back in the good old days, maybe a couple decades ago, Mrs. Finelli and the family and I were visiting relatives on the East Coast. And because it was almost a couple decades ago, because it was such a long trip, I brought my portable scanner with me, and I was looking for where all the police help was on the highways. And so I happened to have it, and I turned it on in their house, and I picked up one of their neighbors' cordless phones. And so I walked into the room where where my relative was, and I said, "Listen to this. This is your neighbor." And she said, "That's really interesting, because it seemed like my neighbors knew everything that was going on in our house, because they had a cordless phone too." So there was a lot of snooping going on back then with people listening into conversations of other people because they had cordless phones. What is the way to prevent that?
Yeah, and by the way, I'll tell you an interesting story. We've talked about cell phone standards before, 5G. Well, going all the way back to 1G, we didn't call it 1G, it was just cell phone. Those were unencrypted analog FM transmissions at, in the 8 to 900 megahertz region. And you could pick them up on a regular, you mentioned police scanner, and I could certainly pick them up on my spectrum analyzer. And, I have an option on our test equipment in our lab where we can FM demodulate the signals. So, you could routinely listen to the first generation cell phones on scanners. The good news is the latest standards, and especially the DECT standard I just mentioned for cordless phone, it's almost impossible for someone else to pick up that signal. I would say it's impossible. I mean, you would need to have CIA level equipment in order to decipher that signal.
Okay, a quick question. Talking about analog, 1G. What about those bag phones? Is it possible, those bag phones had a lot of transmission power, and they had a big battery. So these were those, the days we'd have a bag phone, you could have a cord going to an antenna stuck on the side window or the back window of a car. One of those antennas with a little curly cube type spring, and maybe it's a foot tall total. Is it possible to modify those to make them into a two-way radio, or is it too complicated to do that if you had two of them?
Too complicated to do that. You could why not just get a two-way radio?
Yeah. Well, I was because those phones would go for quite a distance, 7 watts or so, maybe a little more than 7 watts.
Yeah. No,
okay.
There's lots of good two-way radio equipment out now, on different frequencies, and, we have a couple. We use them just for hiking or things like that. Good to use. And by the way, if you're going hiking, bring, besides your cell phone, if you're going on a long hike, bring a satellite transponder so you know where you are. And in some of them, they can actually have a communications channel.
With a satellite transponder? Tell us a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah. Well, there have been cases of hikers disappearing. It's probably another story for another day. But there are devices that you can buy. The lowest cost of ones will just tell you where you are, obviously. But there are some trackers where they have emergency transponders where you can send out a signal if something happens. Now, if you're abducted instantaneously, there's not much time to do anything. But there are devices. So it's interesting that, cell phones don't always work out in the middle of nowhere. And it's not necessarily because they couldn't work, but what they do on a lot, probably most cell phone towers, is limit the distance that they'll communicate with, even if they can pick up your signal.
Fascinating. Bert, we're out of time. Thanks for joining us, and I'm looking forward to having you back again and again and again. So let us know when your schedule permits, please. You've got quite a following, and I sent you proof of that and an email during the broadcast. Thank you so much.